Roy Clark was the face of laughter in American homes. For decades he stood on the Hee Haw stage with his banjo and that easy grin, making millions believe he carried nothing but joy. But when his family opened his closet after his death, they uncovered a very different story. Tucked away among the boots and stage costumes were pieces of a life he rarely let the public see. Reminders of regrets, friendships, and private struggles that weighed heavier than the spotlight ever showed. For his family, it was like meeting a side of Roy they had never known. So why did Roy keep these things hidden? What truths about his career and his legacy were revealed only after he was gone? And why does what they found in that closet change everything we thought we knew about one of country music's most beloved legends? Roy Clark's path to the spotlight began far from the neon lights of Nashville. Born in Virginia in 1933 and raised partly in Arkansas, he grew up surrounded by music. His father played the banjo and guitar, and Roy followed in his footsteps, mastering the strings before he was even a teenager. What set him apart wasn't just talent, but versatility. Banjo, mandolin, fiddle, classical guitar. If it had strings, Roy could play it. By the time he was in his teens, he was winning contests, his speed and precision already making people stop and stare. But talent alone wasn't enough in those days. Roy spent years on the road, cutting his teeth in roadhouses and small clubs, taking whatever gigs came his way. He played backup in bands that most people would never remember, often for little money, but those nights built his confidence. They also taught him how to read a room, how to blend humor with showmanship, and how to keep people entertained even when the spotlight wasn't his. That knack for connecting would later become his trademark. The break that finally lifted him out of obscurity came when he was invited to play with Wanda Jackson, one of the rising stars of rockabilly in the late 1950s. Touring with Jackson gave Roy national exposure, putting him on stages far bigger than anything he had known. His guitar work caught the attention of industry insiders, and soon he was being asked to appear on the Grand Ole Opry and to fill in on national television programs. For a kid who had once played county fairs for pocket change, the leap was enormous. Still, fame didn't arrive overnight. Roy had setbacks, false starts, and long stretches when it seemed like he might never break through fully. He briefly tried his hand at recording singles, but his style didn't quite fit the Nashville mold. He was too playful, too experimental, too eager to blur the lines between genres. Country, bluegrass, jazz, and even classical influences slipped into his playing. Nashville didn't quite know what to do with him, but audiences did. Wherever he played, they cheered. By the early 1960s, Roy was working steadily as both a musician and a television performer. His natural charisma made him a regular guest on variety shows, and his humor was as much a draw as his musicianship. He didn't just play fast, he made people laugh while doing it, sometimes pretending to fumble, then dazzling them with flawless precision a moment later. It was entertainment in the purest sense, and people couldn't get enough. All of this laid the groundwork for what would become his defining opportunity: a role as co-host of a new television program called Hee Haw in 1969. At the time, no one could have guessed that the show would run for more than 2 decades, or that it would make Roy Clark a household name. But everything in his life, those childhood lessons, the small-town gigs, the years of trial and error, had prepared him for it. When his family later opened his closet, tucked between the flashy suits and banjos were reminders of these early years. Old programs, handwritten set lists, and even faded ribbons from contests he won as a boy were still there, kept for decades. They weren't just souvenirs, they were proof of a long road traveled, a reminder of where it all began. And for his family, they showed that no matter how far Roy went, he never let go of the roots that shaped him. By the late 1960s, Roy Clark had already built a reputation as one of the most versatile pickers in country music. But in 1969, His career took a turn that would define him in ways even he didn't anticipate. CBS was launching a variety show called Hee Haw, a blend of country music, comedy sketches and corny jokes set against a rural backdrop. It was part satire, part celebration of small-town America, and the producers wanted two co-hosts who could carry it. They chose Buck Owens, a Bakersfield hitmaker, and Roy Clark, the banjo virtuoso with a quick wit. The chemistry on screen was undeniable. Roy's warmth and Buck's sharp edges played off each other in every scene. Their banter became part of American living rooms week after week. Families gathered around their televisions not just for the music, but for the laughter, the exaggerated farm humor, the one-liners, the slapstick routines. For 25 years, Hee Haw remained a constant presence, outlasting many network shows and eventually moving into syndication where it reached millions more. To the audience, Roy was the smiling face of country fun, always ready with a joke or a silly gag, before breaking into a lightning-fast banjo solo. He became a household name, not just as a musician, but as a comedian. His reach expanded beyond Nashville. People who never set foot in the Grand Ole Opry still knew his name because they saw him every week on television. It was the kind of exposure most country artists could only dream of. Yet the show was both a blessing and a burden. While Hee Haw gave Roy his widest fame, it also trapped him in a public image he didn't always want. Audiences saw the jokes, the bib overalls, the scripted punchlines, and sometimes forgot the serious musician beneath the comedy. Roy was an artist who had mastered jazz guitar, who could hold his own with classical musicians, who had jammed with some of the greatest pickers alive. But on television, week after week, he was mostly the comic relief. That tension extended behind the scenes as well. Roy and Buck Owens, while smiling together on set, had a complicated relationship off-camera. Buck was a businessman at heart, fiercely protective of his brand and music, while Roy leaned more toward the entertainer's side of things. They weren't enemies, but they weren't the inseparable friends people imagined either. For decades, fans assumed they were a duo in every sense, yet in truth their connection rarely extended beyond the studio. Despite those undercurrents, Roy remained grateful for what Hee Haw brought him. The paychecks gave him stability, and the fame gave him opportunities to travel the world. He was invited onto talk shows, variety specials, and stages that had little to do with country music. He appeared on The Tonight Show, performed at the White House, and even took Hee Haw's brand of humor overseas. To millions, he became the ambassador of country charm. When his family later sorted through his closet, the Hee Haw years were impossible to miss. Bright, rhinestone-studded suits still hung in garment bags. Tattered scripts, with his notes scrawled in the margins, were stacked in boxes. There were even old gag props, oversized hats, boots worn for sketches, and bits of costume that looked absurd out of context. But alongside them were photos of Roy with Buck, some smiling, some stiff, hinting at the complicated reality beneath the laughter. For fans, Hee Haw was a weekly escape. For Roy, it was both his greatest gift and his heaviest mask. The show cemented his place in history, but it also left him wondering if people remembered him for the music or just for the punchlines. If Hee Haw made Roy Clark a household name, his musicianship proved why he deserved to stay one. Long before television comedy, Roy was a virtuoso with a guitar or banjo in his hands. What set him apart wasn't just speed. Though his lightning-fast picking amazed audiences, it was his ability to move between styles with ease. Country, bluegrass, jazz, even classical pieces, Roy played them all with precision and flair. For musicians in Nashville and beyond, he wasn't just an entertainer, he was an artist. On stage, he often surprised people who only knew him from television. A Roy Clark concert was part comedy act, part masterclass. He'd crack a joke, stumble across the stage as if fumbling his guitar, then suddenly deliver a flawless classical riff or a blistering banjo solo that left audiences stunned. That balance of humor and technical brilliance kept fans coming back. It also earned him respect from peers who recognized that behind the jokes was a serious craftsman. By the 1970s, Roy's career had expanded far beyond the walls of the Hee Haw set. He recorded dozens of albums blending traditional country with unexpected influences. He could deliver heartfelt ballads like Yesterday, When I Was Young, which became one of his signature songs, then turn around and perform instrumental showcases that pushed country music's boundaries. That versatility allowed him to stand out in an era crowded with stars. His talents took him places few country artists had gone before. In 1976, Roy became one of the first American country musicians to perform in the Soviet Union, breaking cultural barriers with his music. The tour was a success, drawing thousands, and earning him international recognition. It wasn't just novelty audiences who couldn't understand the jokes still felt the power of his playing. Music for Roy was always the universal language. Recognition followed. He was named the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year in 1973, an honor that placed him among the greats of his generation. In time, he would become a member of the Grand Ole Opry and later, in 2009, an inductee into the Country Music Hall of Fame. These accolades weren't given for comedy or television alone. They were acknowledgments of a lifetime spent pushing the boundaries of what country music could be. For Roy's family, his closet reflected this side of him just as clearly as the Hee Haw costumes did. Mixed in with the rhinestone jackets were well-worn instruments, old sheet music, and hand-scribbled set lists from concerts around the world. There were photographs of him backstage with legends like Johnny Cash and Glenn Campbell, as well as mementos from his international tours. Each piece told a story of a man who never stopped striving to be taken seriously as a musician, even while the world laughed along with his television persona. And yet, the irony never escaped him. To millions of fans, Roy Clark would always be the grinning banjo player from Hee Haw. For fellow musicians, he was something more, a player of extraordinary skill, admired and imitated. That dual identity defined his career. In public, he leaned into the laughter because it kept him connected to his audience. In private, he preserved the proof of his artistry, perhaps knowing that one day his family would see both sides and understand the full measure of his talent. Roy's music wasn't just entertainment. It was the bridge between comedy and artistry, between country traditions and broader possibilities. He proved that a man could make people laugh and still leave them speechless with a single note. That was the Roy Clark few truly knew, the one whose legacy went far beyond the punchlines. For all the energy he poured into the stage, Roy Clark always insisted that the truest measure of his life was what happened when the spotlight turned off. Fame had swept him into living rooms across America, but his private world remained carefully grounded. That grounding began with Barbara Joyce Ruppard, the woman he married in 1957 and remained devoted to until his passing in 2018. In an industry where many marriages faltered, theirs endured quietly. Barbara wasn't part of his public image. She didn't appear on stage or in interviews, but she was the partner who steadied him through decades of touring, filming, and pressure. For Roy, her support wasn't background. It was the foundation. Instead of immersing himself in Nashville's competitive environment, Roy built his home base in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That choice shaped his life in profound ways. Tulsa wasn't just where he lived, it was where he belonged. He invested in the city, opening the Roy Clark Theater, supporting community events, and lending his name to charitable causes. To neighbors, he wasn't a distant celebrity. He was the man they saw at local gatherings, the one who quietly gave back without fanfare. Tulsa gave him space to breathe, space to be a husband and father, not just a performer. Faith also played a role in his private identity. While Roy rarely spoke about it publicly, those close to him knew he valued his church community and drew comfort from it. It gave him a sense of continuity, when the entertainment world shifted constantly. That grounding helped him navigate the highs of fame and the inevitable lows when trends moved on. Perhaps the most telling part of Roy's private life was his generosity toward younger musicians. Having once struggled to find his own break, he remembered how much difference encouragement could make. Musicians who crossed paths with him in Nashville or Tulsa often spoke of how he offered advice, opened doors, or even invited them to share his stage. He didn't view mentoring as a chore. It was part of what it meant to belong to the tradition of country music. The Closet, years later, held small reminders of that generosity, handwritten notes from protégés thanking him for guidance, keepsakes from young players whose lives he had touched. But private life wasn't only triumph. Roy also carried reminders of conflicts he never fully resolved. Tucked away were photographs of friends who had drifted, relationships that faded under the strain of distance or career pressures. He rarely spoke of regrets, but the tokens he saved suggested that even in a life of laughter and applause, he knew the sting of broken ties. His family, sorting through those belongings, saw both sides: a man remembered for his kindness, but also one who kept mementos of disappointments close at hand. For Roy, the private world was never meant for the stage. It was for the people he loved most, the community he claimed as his own, and the small gestures of kindness that built his character. His family discovered that side preserved in the items he chose to keep. To them, the closet wasn't shocking because of scandal. It was shocking because it revealed just how much of Roy's truest self had been hidden from view. By the time Roy Clark died in 2018, his reputation seemed firmly established. To casual fans, he was the smiling banjo player who brought humor into American homes through Hee Haw. To his peers, he was a musician of extraordinary skill, a man who could play nearly any stringed instrument with brilliance. But when his family uncovered the personal items he had saved, they were confronted with a deeper truth about what legacy really means. The closet was filled with contrasts. On one side hung the sparkling suits and brightly colored jackets that defined his television persona. These costumes told the story of a man who embraced showmanship, who knew that part of entertaining was catching the eye as well as the ear. On the other side were instruments, banjos and guitars worn smooth from years of performance. These weren't props. They were tools, bearing the marks of someone who practiced endlessly, who never stopped honing his craft. Then there were the surprises: carefully folded letters, photographs tucked into boxes, and tokens from people whose names the public might not recognize. They revealed a man who placed as much value on private gratitude as on public applause. In the wider world, Roy's career had already been validated. His tours took him to countries where country music was barely known, including groundbreaking performances in the Soviet Union. His recordings, from heartfelt ballads like Yesterday, When I Was Young, to instrumental showcases, proved his versatility. His induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2009 placed him alongside the giants he admired. None of that could be taken away. But the family's discoveries suggested that Roy himself had wrestled with questions of how he would be remembered. Fans sometimes debated whether Hee Haw overshadowed his artistry. Some critics dismissed the show as cornball entertainment, a caricature of rural life. Others credited it with keeping country music alive on national television long after variety shows had faded. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Roy carried both sides within him: the entertainer who thrived on laughter, and the musician who wanted to be judged by the notes he played. The items in his closet didn't resolve that tension, but they illuminated it in a way his family had never fully seen. For them, the legacy was no longer just about what he accomplished in the public eye. It was about the whole man: the husband who stayed true for 6 decades, the neighbor who gave back to his community, the mentor who quietly shaped new generations. His closet had become, in effect, a time capsule of his values. It contained the dazzling evidence of his fame, but also the quieter proof of a life rooted in loyalty, generosity, and perseverance. What his family found changed the way they spoke about him. They realized that while the world would always remember the grin, the banjo, and the comedy sketches, his truest legacy was the balance he struck between public joy and private depth. For fans too, that fuller picture matters. It shows that Roy Clark's life cannot be summed up by a single stage, a single show, or even a single talent. It was a mosaic of devotion, artistry, and humanity. In that sense, the family's discovery didn't alter his legacy. It expanded it. It allowed those who loved him, both privately and from afar, to see Roy Clark not just as a performer, but as a man whose life was as layered as the music he played. And that is the story worth remembering. When Roy Clark's family opened his closet, they expected memories. What they found was a fuller picture of the man the world thought they knew, a musician of staggering talent, a husband who stayed true, an entertainer who carried both laughter and doubt. His life was never just comedy, never just music, it was both, and more. The closet didn't change his legacy, but it deepened it. It reminded his family, and his fans, that behind every joke and every note was a man who gave everything he had to the stage and left behind a story that still resonates today. For more emotional stories, check out this video.